She was a princess, daughter of a king. She could have had anyone. Instead, she fell for a shepherd-turned-warrior who her father was actively trying to murder. And here's the thing, she didn't just love him from a distance. She risked everything to save his life. Defied her father. Committed treason. Lied to assassins at her door. And you know what happened next. He abandoned her. Left her behind. Married other women. She was given to another man. Forced into a second marriage she didn't choose. And then, years later, when David had become powerful enough to take whatever he wanted, he demanded her back. Not because he loved her, but because she was politically useful. Her name was Michal. And her story is either the most romantic tragedy in the Bible, or it's a textbook example of how women were treated as property in ancient power struggles. I honestly can't tell which one it is. And by the end of this, you'll understand why. Because Michal's story has everything. Forbidden love, political manipulation, a daring midnight escape, forced separation, and a reunion that's so cold and bitter it'll make you question whether love ever really existed in the first place. This isn't a fairy tale. This is about what happens when you're a pawn in your father's war, when the man you saved forgets you existed, and when you finally get the courage to speak the truth, and it destroys you. The Bible gives us just enough detail to know this story is devastating. But it leaves out just enough that you have to read between the lines. So let me show you what really happened to the princess who loved David. Michal was King Saul's younger daughter. And in ancient Israel, being a princess meant you were a political asset, not a person with choices. Your marriage would be arranged based on what benefited your father's kingdom. Love was irrelevant. But Michal did something unexpected, she fell in love. The book of Samuel 18:20 says that, now Saul's daughter Michal loved David. And they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. The Bible explicitly says Michal loved David. This is one of the only places in the entire Old Testament where we're told a woman loved a man before marriage. And Saul was pleased, not because he wanted his daughter happy, but because he saw an opportunity to get David killed. By this point, David had killed Goliath and become a military hero. People sang songs. Saul has killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. Saul hated David for it. He was paranoid, jealous, convinced David would take his throne. So when Saul heard about Michal's feelings, he didn't see a son-in-law. He saw a weapon. The Bible says Saul thought, let me give her to him, that she may be a snare for him. A snare. He was using his daughter as bait. Saul told David he could marry Michal, but the bride price was 100 foreskins of Philistines. Meaning David had to kill 100 enemy soldiers in close combat. Saul was certain David would die trying. David killed 200 and brought back double the proof. Saul had no choice but to keep his word and give Michal to David as his wife. For Michal, this might have felt like a dream coming true. For David, this was a political alliance. For Saul, this was a nightmare, because now his own daughter loved his enemy. Saul's jealousy turned murderous. He literally tried to spear David to death in the palace. David barely escaped and ran home, to Michal. That night, Saul sent assassins to their house with orders to kill David in the morning. Michal had to choose, loyalty to her father the king, or loyalty to the man she loved. She chose David. She helped him escape through a window in the middle of the night while assassins waited outside. This wasn't just helping a husband, this was treason. But it gets better. After David escaped, the assassins came to arrest him in the morning. And Michal lied brilliantly. She made a decoy, put it in their bed with a pillow of goat's hair, covered it with clothes, and told the soldiers David was too sick to move. When Saul discovered the trick, he confronted his daughter. Why have you deceived me and let my enemy go? Notice that. Saul called David, my enemy, not your husband. Michal was caught. She'd committed treason. Her father could have her executed. So she lied again, claiming David threatened her life. It probably wasn't true, but she had to say something to survive. Saul let her live, but David was gone, fled into the wilderness, on the run from the king. And Michal, she was left behind. Here's where the story gets devastating. David didn't come back for her. He fled to the wilderness, gathered followers, survived assassination attempts, moved from place to place. And while he was on the run, he got married. Again, the Bible tells us David married Abigail and Ahinoam, 2 more wives. While Michal, His first wife, the woman who saved his life, was still back in Saul's palace. Did he send for her? Did he try to get her out? The Bible doesn't say. What it does say is this. In 1 Samuel 25:44, Saul had given Michal his daughter, David's wife, to Palti the son of Laish. Saul gave Michal to another man. Not, Michal married. Not, Michal chose. He just reassigned her like property to a man named Palti. Michal had no say, no choice. She'd risked her life to save David, and in return, she was handed off to another man while David moved on with multiple new wives. Was this punishment for her betrayal, or just how women were treated? And here's what the Bible doesn't tell us. Michal lived with Palti for years. David was on the run for a long time. Eventually Saul died. David became king of Judah, then all Israel. And Michal was still with Palti. If you're starting to feel uncomfortable, subscribe, because the ending is even worse. Years passed. David consolidated power as king. And then, suddenly, David decided he wanted Michal back. Not because he loved her. Not because he'd been searching for her. Because she was politically useful, proof of his legitimate claim to Saul's throne. David sent a message demanding, "Give me my wife Michal, for whom I paid the bride price of 100 foreskins." Notice the language. She's an asset, a transaction he paid for. And they just took her. From her home. From the man she'd been living with for years. And here's the most devastating verse. In 2 Samuel 3:16 it says, "But her husband went with her, weeping after her all the way to Bahurim." Palti followed her, weeping, all the way to the border until David's commander told him to go home. The Bible doesn't tell us if Michal loved Palti. But it tells us he loved her enough to follow her crying until forced to turn back. Imagine being Michal, ripped from one home, forced back to a man who abandoned you years ago. Watching a man who actually loved you being turned away, weeping. Did David greet her warmly? Apologize? Even speak to her? The Bible doesn't say. What it does tell us is that by this point, David had 6 sons by 6 different wives, plus concubines. Michal was just one woman in a growing royal harem. She wasn't special anymore, just a political symbol. Then came the moment that broke her completely. David brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, a massive celebration. David danced in the streets wearing a linen ephod, leaping before the Lord with everything he had. It was pure joy for David. Religious ecstasy. Triumph. And Michal watched from a window. The Bible says she despised him in her heart. Not loved him. Not admired him. Despised him. When David came home celebrating, Michal was waiting. And she let him have it. How the king of Israel honored himself today, uncovering himself before the eyes of his servants' female servants, as one of the vulgar fellows shamelessly uncovers himself. She mocked him, accused him of exposing himself like a common fool. Was she right about his dancing being inappropriate? Or was this about something much deeper, years of abandonment, betrayal, forced remarriage, being treated like property? Because notice, the text calls her, Michal the daughter of Saul, not David's wife. Maybe she was finally saying what she'd wanted to say for years, "You left me. You forgot me. You took me back like property. And now you're dancing like a fool." David's response was ice cold. He threw her father's failure in her face. "God chose me over your father. I don't care what you think. Those servant girls respect me more than you do." He dismissed her completely. And then comes the final, devastating line, and probably the one we all remember Michal within 2 Samuel 6:23, "And Michal the daughter of Saul had no child to the day of her death." No children. Ever. In ancient Israel, a woman's value was tied to producing heirs, especially a royal woman. Michal had no children, no legacy, no voice, no power. She saved David's life, committed treason for him, lost everything, and died childless and forgotten. So here's what I can't figure out. Was Michal a bitter woman who couldn't appreciate David's genuine worship? Or was she a woman who'd been used, abandoned, and silenced, finally speaking truth to power and being punished for it? Religious tradition often paints Michal as the villain, proud, contemptuous, unable to understand spiritual joy. But if you read between the lines, Michal's story is about a woman who loved the wrong man, saved his life, was given away like property, dragged back when convenient, and then mocked for having feelings about it. David is called a man after God's own heart. But was he a good husband to Michal? Did he ever actually love her? Or was she just the first of many women he collected for political advantage? What do you think? Was Michal bitter and petty, or finally telling the truth after years of silence? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want more biblical stories that show the uncomfortable parts nobody talks about, subscribe, because we're just getting started.